All right, I am here to record lecture 0 of Webdeversity Frontend Web Development Training series. So, with that being said, let's just get started. I don't want to bore you too much with a whole bunch of talk. So, the first thing I'm going to start to do here is delete the folder that I already had so we can walk through this together. And what I want to do is open up a Finder window, or I believe it's a File Explorer if you're using a PC. So I want to open that, which you can see here, and I'm going to change my view to the list view just so it looks a little more like a PC, and I'm going to navigate to the desktop. So once I'm on the desktop, let's get this a little larger. I want to create a folder or a directory. So if I click anywhere in the window pane, I just want to make sure that the actual window is selected. I can hit new folder in a Mac, and I think it says new, and then you navigate to folder in a PC. So there I can just name the folder that I want. So I'm going to create a folder called Webdeversity on my desktop. And I have it set up right now to show like the most recent files or directories that have been created. So as you can see here, previous 7 days, these two, and then today, Webdeversity. All right, so once I have that, I want to click into that folder. And then I know I'm inside that folder because right up here, it lets me know. It says Webdeversity. I'm sorry, this Zoom is a little funny, but I wanted to make sure it was large enough where everyone could see it. So the other way you can create a folder is a shortcut. You can either hit Command Shift N on a Mac or Control Shift N on a PC. So I'm going to hit that, and now I'm going to create a new folder entitled lesson_0. So that's the shortcut to do it. And from here on out, you can do it how you prefer. Once I have that, I want to go into there, and I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to use the shortcut again, Command Shift N, and call this one intro to the path, or intro path. So as you can see here, I'm using the naming convention, all lowercase letters and underscores to represent spaces. This is called snake case. So you can see the underscore is kind of low to the ground like a snake, and that's how it gets its name. So the reason that we name things like this, and this one I'm going to select again, right click and hit new folder. The reason we name things like this is due to the fact that spaces are an actual character. I know a lot of times we just think of them as like being empty, but it's not actually empty. It's represented on the keyboard. So the space is a character. So if we have spaces in our directories or in our file names later on the internet, that can create some janky issues. So we don't want that. So here I'm going to create another folder, and we're going to call this exercise_0. And the reason I'm starting with 0 is because in computer science, you start counting at 0. So I just want that to be something that we get used to doing. So now I have that folder, and we're good to go as far as the folder creation goes. So I just want to go over here a little, and you have something similar. So if I go back to my desktop and I click Webdeversity, now I can see these arrows here. And if I click down, and it will look similar on a Windows or PC, you can see this indentation, which tells me that these two folders have a relationship. Basically, this intro path folder is nested inside of this lesson 0 folder. And the word nesting refers to basically a parent-child relationship, where if you think of it in terms of humans, when they say, have you left the nest yet? That refers to, are you still living with your parents? So nesting, that's what this term, how you describe this parent-child relationship. And you can see that indentation whenever we go down. So this nesting is something that's important to remember because there's a lot of these relationships in computer science. All right. Now let's move on. We're going to create a file. So hopefully you already downloaded. Let me get back to my normal screen here for a second. Hopefully you already downloaded Visual Studio Code, and I'm not going to have to explain too much as far as that goes, but I'll just briefly explain Visual Studio Code. So let's just close this. I already had this up, so I'm just going to close it. And you can find this information, this intro to path document, should be in your, well, no, it is in the classroom. So here we see directory folder structure, and it talks more about, gets into detail as far as how directories work. So let's go back and open up our Visual Studio Code so we can go straight to the welcome screen. I want you to see what that looks like. All right. Here we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and get a side-by-side view with these two. So I'm just going to open this up a little larger right now, and there's some release notes because it updated. But here is the welcome screen for Visual Studio Code. And you can see here it has a start menu that has new file. So if you click this, it will open up a new file that you can, let's just click it. And it says new file, and you can start editing. Then you have to save that file and pick a directory to save it in. The other option here is open folder. So this all goes back to the directories and the relationships that we're creating. So if I go to open folder, I want to navigate to where I plan on putting the files for my website. So websites have directories and files just like any other folder would. So I want to go into Webdeversity. I'm already there, so let me just navigate back out to my desktop. I want to go to our Webdeversity folder, then our lesson 0 directory, then our intro path directory, and finally, I want my files to go in this exercise 0. So this is actually going to be referred to as my root directory inside of Visual Studio. If I were to click Webdeversity, I have an explainer video on how that can create issues. So we always want to click the primary directory that we want to store our files and other folders for our website inside of. So that's going to be exercise 0 in this case. So that's open down here. You can see exercise 0. And right here, I can go create a file, or I can create a new folder. I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call it my_file. Again, we're using that name convention of snake case, and I'm just going to give it the .txt extension. So it opens right up for me. Let me get rid of this untitled file. So it opens right up for me, and I'm just going to add some text or some text. This is lecture 0. And we will be learning front-end dev. All right, so now we have some text in here. So let me get this screen a little wider. If I open a new window here, I can actually drag, at least in a Mac, I can drag it into the address bar here, and right away, that path will be put into the address bar. So let me put that in and hit enter. And right away, I see this is lecture 0 and we will be learning front-end dev. So exactly what I wrote over here on the right, I'm seeing over here on the left. So the browser actually has the power to interpret text. So the thing that we need to do when it comes to HTML or other languages is HTML specifically, we want to format this text. And right now there's no way to do that. So I couldn't change this text. Nothing I could do in this text file could change it. So also quickly, I want to take a look at this path. So let me get the screen a little bigger again. So if we look here, we see the path to this file. So here, this is pretty much my root directory for my computer. So it's pretty much my hard drive, and then this is the root directory for my computer. And if we go from here, users, we see my name, and then we see the desktop, and then the directories that we created, the Webdeversity, lesson 0, intro path. So for instance, here, if we would have left a space here, it would create some characters that are like %, 20, %, something like that. I can't remember the exact characters that would be in the place of this, but it would look weird. And actually, no, I don't want to do that right now. I was thinking about going to put that in so you can see it, but that's okay. So intro path, exercise 0. So exercise 0 in this case is actually our root directory that contains the file. So if we look here, we see Webdeversity, and then we see this / right here. So that / pretty much tells the computer, it takes in this name, and then since there's no dot here, a dot is going to say, okay, what type of file is this? That's what it's going to tell the computer. Instead, it says /, which means enter the folder. This is a directory. I want you to enter that directory. That's what the / means. And then in there, look for lesson 0, and then again, check the next character. If it's a /, that means it's a directory, or a /. If it's a dot, that means that you can expect some type of file. So again, we see the / go into the lesson 0 directory. There we have intro _ path. Again, we look at that next character. It's a / go into that directory. All the way until we get into the exercise 0 directory, and then we see my file, and the next character is a dot. So that means that a file type is going to come after this. And in this case, that file type or extension is txt. So since we're creating websites, we don't use txt files or doc files or Word docs or anything like that. We use HTML. So what is Word or a program like that? It's basically a text editor. And this Visual Studio, this IDE or integrated development environment, is also a text editor, but it's a text editor specifically for coding, where if we have certain keywords, it will highlight those. So in HTML, we have what's called the HTML element, and that allows us to format the text in a particular way. If you think about HTML, how it began was scientists wanted to share their research papers and things like that. So they needed a way to format that text, because in a research paper, you have headings, you have paragraphs, you have lists, you have tables or tabular data, and you also, the most important part of that was HTML stands for hypertext markup language. The hypertext is a fancy word for link. So they needed a way to share that research that was easier and faster than, say, mailing that research or mailing out a whole bunch of research papers. So links are how they accomplish that, or hypertext. So how we create an element in HTML is we put a opening angle bracket or a lesser than sign followed by a tag name. So in this case, I'm put H1, which means heading 1. And then you can see in Visual Studio, it automatically closed it for me. So this is the opening tag here. And then I want my content to go in between these two. And you can see this looks very similar, the closing tag, where lesser than sign / H1. So the only difference here is that /. So this is an HTML element. And as you can see, when I put it over here and I refresh, I see H1 inside of there. That's because my file is still a TXT file. So let me rename my file here. So let's rename it. And you'll see a difference right away when I rename it. Well, first off, I haven't even pressed enter yet, and I see that the icon changed to, that is the HTML5 icon or logo. So when I hit enter and I look to the right, I see now that this opening tag and this closing tag have changed. So the color has changed. It's called syntax highlighting, which basically highlights certain keywords or phrases and makes them stand out. So I can see here that I have an HTML element now. The entire thing is an element itself. This is the opening tag, the angle bracket, H1 angle bracket. And then this is the content that ends up being shown over here on the browser. So let's see what happens when I refresh the page again. And I'm trying to move this over here. Come on. There we go. Wasn't cooperating with me. So when we refresh the page, and you can either hit Control R, Command R on a Mac, or you can hit this little reloading icon over here. So I see here, your file was not found. Well, that's because over here, I changed the extension. So if we look back up here, inside of the address bar, I see myfile.txt. So it's still looking for a file that's a TXT file. But remember, we changed it to HTML. So now when I hit it, and let me zoom out, you can see the text changed. It's formatted now. It's much larger than it was. So that's the whole goal of HTML, is to format that text. And you can see here, if I change the name of this and I change it to a P tag, and again, Visual Studio is helping me. All I did was erase the name in the opening tag, and it changed the closing tag as well. So now when I save and I go in here and I reload, I'm going to see the text is much smaller, because now P is paragraph. So I see the text is much smaller. So our headings go from H1 through H6, which we'll get into a little bit more in a minute here. But first, we don't write HTML just like this. We need other information that the browser needs for that particular page. So how we start writing HTML is, first we, again, use the opening angle bracket or the lesser than sign, followed by exclamation point. And I can see at the bottom here, it's trying to help me. So I could actually click this and it would fill it out, but I guess I'll just do that. Let's click it and it's going to fill it out. It says doc type, which means document type. So remember, files are just documents basically. So when it says what type of document is this? Well, it's an HTML5 document. Even though it doesn't say 5 here, they have different versions of this doc type. And you can go look some of those up if you want, but I guess let's just do that real quick. Let's put doc type HTML4. And when I search that in Google, I can see, well, let's go in here. That's not HTML4. So this is HTML4 over here. Let me zoom in a little over on the left here. And I see this is what it used to look like. So this is everything you used to have to put in to specify to your browser that the following document was going to be HTML4. So with HTML5, which is the most recent version of HTML, we can use a simpler doc type syntax here, where we just say doc type HTML. It's telling the browser, hey, we're going to use HTML5 in this document. All right, so the next line that we need is the HTML tag or element. So remember we talked about nesting and how we nest directories to show a relationship between those directories, a parent-child relationship. And here we have the same thing in terms of our HTML tags. So what we have here is an HTML element, and remember, we can put content between the opening tag here and the closing tag here. So that content isn't just text. We can put other HTML elements inside of elements. So let's do that. The next element that we're going to choose here is head. And head, just like a human head, and you have your brain, it kind of stores information. So the head of a HTML document has information about the page for the browser. So the browser gets the information that's inside the head, and they're like, okay, this is what you want with the page. So let's say I say title, which is another element here, title. And there's also metadata that you store inside the head, as well as links to external files. So title, and let's put my first web page and hit save. So let's close this over here. And if I hit refresh here, I see up here in the tab my first web page. And let's zoom in on that. My first web page. All right. So you can see it's not showing up on the screen or in the window itself. It's just showing up here. That's because, again, it's in the head section or the head element. Next is the content we want to show up in this window over here. And that all goes in an element called the body. So the body of our document, that's going to have all the content that is displayed. So again, let's use that H1 tag that we already looked at, or H1 element, and then let's put some content inside of it. So let's just put heading 1, because that's what this is. It's a heading. So heading 1 is the largest and most important. So we look here, we see heading 1. That's when I saved and refreshed the other page. So heading 1 is the most important. And usually there's only one H1 per page. So only one heading 1, which usually is like what the I guess title of that page would be. And then we have H2 through H6. So right now, I'm going to show you a shortcut, which is we could either write that. Let's write these first ones out. H2. We'll put heading 2 here. Let's put H3, heading 3. And now I'm going to tell you a shortcut. So this goes H1 through H6. And if I click anywhere in this line, well, first off, I could copy paste, but I can also hit Alt Shift down. So this is a feature of the Visual Studio Code editor. Alt Shift down copies it down. And let's just say I changed this one already to 5. I can actually copy up too. I guess it'd be hard to tell right now, but let's copy one down, change it to 6, and then, well, you can copy up a line. It doesn't look like it, but that's what I just did there. So let's get rid of that one. So here we have H1 through H6, and here's another trick. I can have multiple cursors on the page by alt-clicking next to the characters I want to change. So I can change all these at one time. So I could say 4, but obviously these ones I would have to switch. And remember, I have that auto rename tag on. So when I change the opening tag, it also changes the closing tag. So here, let's put 6. So now if I refresh over here, I see the headings and their different sizes, 1 through 6. So sticking with the theme of textual elements, let's create a paragraph element. Paragraphs are pretty important to writing documents. So let's have a paragraph element, and here I'm going to type in lorem. And lorem means lorem ipsum, which is just kind of a Latin type of text. And basically it's used as placeholder text, meaning it's not meant for reading. It's meant to just simulate text, basically. So here, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to right click, and I see here I have a paragraph. Oh, one more note about the headings. Usually we use H1 through H3 headings. It's very rare that you'll see an H4, H5, or H6 in a document. So primarily, this again is going to be kind of the main page title, or if this was a newspaper, it'd be the front page headline. These H2s are more like sectional titles, and then the H3 is often used as a subtitle. So let's look at our paragraph here. So just like the body, now we have 6 and then 7 with the paragraph children inside of this body element. So the body is now the parent to these 7 children. But any element that has an opening tag and a closing tag can actually contain other elements. So in here, let's say I want to make this first sentence bold. I use the strong element. And then I would want to cut this text with Command X or Control X on a PC, and then Command V or Control V on a PC. So that pastes it into where I wanted it, between this opening tag and this closing tag. And then if you notice here too, it's first in, last out. So if I declare this opening paragraph element or tag first, I have to close it last. So this strong tag is still nested inside of the paragraph tag. So if I go refresh here, well, I didn't save here. So let me save, and now refresh. I see that first sentence is bold, and it's even asking Google Translate is saying, do you want to translate this? And I'm going to say no there. because I don't think it can be translated. Next time I'll try to see if that even works. So that makes the text bold. That's called strong. Next, let's make this last part italicized, or really it's referred to as emphasized. So we're going to use the EM tag. And here, this kind of creates some issues. So that's why when I started to try to rename it started renaming both. It was having an issue with that. So what I want to do again is select the text that I want inside of that and cut it and then paste it inside of the M element. So now all of this will be italicized over here. So let's refresh, and if we look on the right side, we can see that's all italicized. I'm going to zoom in on that right side a little just so we can see things better. So what happens if I try to place a paragraph inside of a paragraph? Can we do that? So let's take this sentence here and make a paragraph. So I'm going to, again, cut this with Command X, Control X, and then paste it in with Command V or Control V. So now this sentence here is a new paragraph. So let's see what happens when I save and then refresh. What happened here? So basically, it kind of put things onto a new line. And that's because the paragraph element, much like these heading elements, like these aren't just right next to each other. And the reason for that is, even though you can't see it right now, the paragraph and H1 through H6 elements are all called block level elements, meaning they take up 100% width of their parent, which in this case is the body. So they'll fall down to the next line. Whereas the strong tag over here and the strong element and the M element or emphasized element, those are called inline elements, meaning they stay in line. They don't fall to the next line. So when I put a new paragraph in here, it caused that paragraph then fell down to the next line, and then the paragraph, wherever it ended, that fell down to the next line. So we can actually look at this. If I hit right click, you got to be in a Chrome browser, and you definitely want to use Chrome for web development, by the way. So if you haven't downloaded that, download it. So we go in the Chrome browser and we hit inspect, and then here I see elements. And when I hover over this H1, I see that it's going actually all the way to the end of the page. The same with the H2, the H3, so on and so forth. And then if I get down in here, I see this paragraph, and then I see this strong tag, though when I hover over that, it only takes up this space, this amount of space. So it only takes up as much space as the content within it. Whereas these, no matter how much content I have in it, will fall down to the next line. So let's even erase some of this so there's only a couple words in it. So I'm going to erase this, and now I'm going to hit refresh over here. And we can see this second paragraph where I just erased some of the content. It still has a width that spans the entire window. So let's get rid of all that, and I can go back by pressing Control-Z on a PC or Command-Z on a Mac. So I'm just going to go back, get rid of that paragraph, and make it how it was before. So now when I refresh, it's back to the way it was. So just be wary of that when certain elements take up 100% width of the parent. So the body is the parent, which is pretty much the entire browser window. All right, so our next textual element is going to be the actual link, which is, it's a special element in this case. the hypertext. It's the hypertext in HTML. So below our paragraph, let's make an anchor tag. So these elements are called anchors. You can see here that I have A as for the name. So inside of here, let's say I put google.com. This is what is going to be displayed, and let's just put Google. This is what's going to be displayed over here. And if, let's get rid of this. If I hit refresh, I see Google down here, but it's not doing anything. And that's because computers, we have to tell them what to do. So right now I'm just saying Google. The computer just sees that as text, and it's like, where do you want to go? So we need to tell it where we want this link to go. And how we do that is something in the HTML called the attribute. So an attribute is basically like something that, an additional property that you can add to that element. So just the element itself is formatted when we have the opening tag and the closing tag. But we can also give it attributes. In this case, we want to tell it where it's supposed to go. And that's called href, for hypertext reference. If I hit href equal sign, no spaces in here, because again, if the browser comes across a space, it's going to think we're trying to add another attribute. And then we want these double quotes. So we want the attribute name equal sign double quotes. And in the double quotes, we put the value. So in this case, the value where we want this to go is google.com. So let's down here, let's add a comment. So this is the first time we're seeing comments. And the easy way to make a comment in Visual Studio Code is Control / for a PC or Command / for a Mac. And that is the comment here. And you can see it's kind of gray. So that tells you this is something that won't actually be seen in the browser window. So this is how we can comment things for other developers or for ourselves to read better. So in here, I'm just going to put the anchor tag, or actually let's put an element in how it should look. So you have the tag name, and here I'm using camel case naming conventions, where you have the second word, and if there was a third word, you start to capitalize. So if this was tag name here, I would need a H. So you start with the lowercase, and then each additional word, you give it a uppercase, and that's called camel case naming convention. And then we have attribute name equal sign, and then in here is the value. So this is often referred to as a key value pair, where you kind of have the key, which is the label or the name, and then here is the value. So this is how any attribute or most attributes inside of a HTML element should look. And then we have the closing angle bracket, or the greater than sign, content. And then we have the closing tag of the element. So remember, this tag name, these should be the same. And I can see when I select one, they both highlight. So if I select this, they both highlight. So that should be the same, and it should always be in this order, where first you have to specify the tag name, because you're telling the browser what type of tag you want. That's the first thing the browser needs to know. Like, okay, you're going to do some type of formatting. I know that from this angle bracket. So how do you want to format this thing? So you need to let it know the name. And then the attributes can be in any order after you specify these two things. And the attributes also always go in the opening tag, never in the closing tag. So let's add a few more of these links. And again, I'm going to hit that Alt-Shift-Down shortcut. So let's have let's have click me, just so you know, this is what the link is going to read as. Facebook, let's say Yahoo. And this one, we'll just put another link. So when I save that and I refresh my page, now I see my links have colors and they're formatted correctly. So an anchor tag doesn't make much sense if you don't have a attribute that tells it where to go. So before it was black, but as soon as I put in this href, it changed colors. So I like to use little graphic visual representations for me to remember things. So the way I remember a link, first off, is I think of a big, rusty, like ship link chain going down to an anchor. So that link chain might have like barnacles on it when I picture it in my mind. Like the more I can make that image stand out in my mind, the more likely I am to remember it. And it's the same with everyone. So, and then as far as href, I usually just like to think of a hyper referee that's dragging around this anchor, like in a link chain going to that anchor. So he's like running a hyper referee running around with it. So whatever you can do, you can think of your own stories or your own little visual cues to help you remember some of these necessary attributes and whatnot. So these things you just have to memorize, and with muscle memory and things like that. So that's something that I like to do, and I'll do a couple more of those where, I just tell you what I think of in terms of how I remember that this particular element needs this attribute.